Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuhu, brothers and sisters. I'm here with Sidi Sutherland, and we're sitting here, and we've got the Lincoln Cathedral, and we've got the statue of Tennyson sitting before us, and yeah, we're going to try out something new here. Well, new for us anyway. We're just going to have like a discussion on first of all Tennyson, because as an English teacher I teach them his poetry. I have to teach Charge of a Light Brigade, and for Key Stage 3 sometimes we teach The Lady of Shalott, which I don't know very well, but certainly I have to read the Charge of a Light Brigade quite regularly. And yeah, Sidi Paul, we're just sitting here, and he's had some lovely thoughts about Tennyson. So
well,
yeah.
He's one of the people that have inspired me since I've come to Lincolnshire in 2000, and going to Somerby, where he was born, which is a very, very small village, and the different stories about him, which kind of undermine the sort of image of him being staid and very establishment figure that I think he has developed, and you see that in the statue here. For example, he was capable of walking from Somersby to the North Sea and not stopping until he reached the North Sea, because he was in reverie. From those 12 miles, he was just out of himself, walking along as a boy.
Right.
And he was brought up by parents. One, the father was almost classified as insane, because his brother had been given all the inheritance, who was younger than him, and he couldn't cope with it. And so the parents didn't have the same control over their children as maybe other parents would have had. And Tennyson was able to explore to a high degree, and he had this capacity to experience elation walking. And no doubt he was creating, and no doubt he was producing poetry as he was walking along, and he didn't stop until his feet touched the North Sea.
Subhanallah.
This is what the stories that have come down about him.
Well, it sounds like, from the way you've described him, it sounds like he was like a majzoob when he was a kid. So a majzoob is like someone who's gone crazy with the love of God, but what you're saying is that he would just, in a state of reverie, in a state of almost like a trance, he would just be walking along.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, and of course, I don't think he would have made any distinction between the creativity that was going to lead to a poem and his love of God. It would be all mixed up in the same kind of experience, of a heightened experience of anything, of just engaging with what was there.
Yeah.
At the same time, he had a mother who could stand up to her husband, who was drinking and bashing walls and things like that.
Right.
And you can see that through Tennyson's poem. He has a great respect for women.
MashaAllah. So just to kind of come back to our audience here, if there is any audience here, I'm Novid Shaid from Aylesbury, English teacher. I also love writing poetry, like write books, and we have my friend here, and also Ustaz, teacher in poetry, Sidi Sutherland, who just lives not far from here, some 20 minutes away, Market Raisin.
Yeah, Market Raisin.
So I've come up here today because obviously Paul and I, we've done various kind of online poetry sessions together, and for me, I'm a great believer in you should, when you meet someone, you should meet them face to face and establish a link. So I've come up here to Lincoln.
Is it better in the sun or better in the shade? Where would you like to be?
I think it's
better here.
I think it's okay here.
Yeah, okay.
Should be okay. I hope it's okay anyway. Yeah. So for me, Tennyson. I teach for year 10 and year 11 kids. I have to read the Charge of the Light Brigade.
It's a shame that you only going to have to read that poem.
That's the main thing that we. So what you were saying before about the whole
remarkable poem. In Memoriam is these sort of 100 plus short little poems describing the grief he feels towards losing his friend Arthur Hallam, Arthur Hallam and him were what were called disciples at the University of Cambridge, which is a great step for Tennyson. And Tennyson, living in Lincolnshire and Somersby, needed something to really get him on the stage, as it were. And going to Cambridge University, which became possible, he met there Arthur Hallam, and Arthur Hallam recognized his talent, and he began to push Tennyson towards getting published and getting recognized and so on.
MashaAllah.
And they were great friends, and they were both involved in collecting funds for radical insurrectionaries on the continent.
Right.
And it's on one of those journeys that Arthur Hallam passed away, and in memoriam celebrates and grieves the loss of his friend. And it's kind of interesting because it's a man loving a man, you know, with perhaps I don't think there is an erotic relationship between them, though some people have tried to claim there might be. But we just have to remember how close, you know, fellow artists could be, poets, and the whole poem tries to come to terms with grief. And such famous lines as nature in tooth and claw, and at one point he describes himself as a widow. And I love that, the way he crosses the gender, say, I'm like a widow, I've lost my life here.
For us, we have to study the charge in quite a lot of depth.
Yeah.
But certainly the language is so powerful. He talks about the Battle of Balaclava, and these soldiers rode the 600, right?
Yes.
Those are 600 who are charging to their deaths. Boldly they rode him well, towards certain death. And it's probably the best, I would say, in the English language, it's probably the best portrayal of soldiers who are just completely committed to a sense of duty. They know they're going to die, but they just charge towards their death with just complete, how can we say, just awesomeness. That's the way they describe. And he describes where the Russians are waiting. He describes it as the valley of death, the mouth of hell. And they seem like simple metaphors, but the valley, the mouth of hell, he really captures the idea that hell, that war makes hell kind of like arrive on earth.
I think is
turns
the
earth
conflict
into hell.
Is, a lot of people in the past believe this was an anti-war poem. My wife was brought up in a conscientious objector family,
right?
And they believed it was an anti-war poem, even though it was published in newspapers and everything, as to say, look at us wonderful imperialists, these brave men charging to their death. It's so heroic, patriotic, and it can be read very as glamorizing, that violence. But on the other hand, like you're saying, but that's Tennyson. He was not straightforward. He was not, like, for example, his wonderful poem "Crossing the Bar," which he always ended every book of which that he got published. He would want to end it with this poem called "Crossing the Bar," which he wrote on the Irish Sea, near the last days of his life, in the last years of his life. Not totally the last year, but getting on. He's quite elderly. And he doesn't name the pilot as Jesus.
Right.
He names it as the pilot. You see? An evening star. He's using the language of poetry. And that's why it's open to different interpretations, just like the Charge of the Right Brigade is open to different interpretations. You can see it heroically, or you can see it as saying, this thing should not happen.
Indeed. MashaAllah.
But in Maud, he does seem to be leaning towards that's what one of the tasks of a good man is, to give their life, or perhaps give their life in combat.
For me, another thing about Tennyson is, and I think in some ways it's justified that we teach charge of the Light Brigade, because the versification, his use of rhythm in the poem is just so amazing, where the metrical feet, they almost represent the charging of the horses.
Brilliant.
And just
yeah.
half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. So we actually do a scansion of the metrical feet within the poem, and it's it's a master of meter.
And yet he didn't have that right at the beginning. He learned it. That's one of the things that has been said about him. He didn't have this musicality just as he was born with it. You see, he had changed the Lady of Shalott a lot from the earlier versions of it to the one that was published. And you can see the changes he's made, and I can't give you all those changes right now. But he was modernizing his language in terms of where he was in history and later to middle 19th century. But he's considered one of the most musical. I think W.H. Auden called him the most musical and stupid of all poets. Never mind.
So it was stupid because perhaps he was a bit too nationalistic.
Yes, I think you could read it that way, definitely, because W.H. Auden would have nothing to do with that, would he? I mean, he just saw it as the madness of men. And tragically, and you do have to wonder how often do women actually create wars. I don't know. And again, how often do anyone and children create wars? Do they create wars?
Well, men.
Who does create?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So as we were saying, from the Islamic perspective, from the spiritual perspective, I was saying that the Prophet ﷺ, there's the famous hadith, seek knowledge even unto China.
Yeah.
And that wisdom is the lost she-camel of the Muslim. And the third hadith is طلب العلم فريضة على كل Muslim. Seeking knowledge is an obligation on every Muslim. And seeking knowledge is not just like spiritual, reading the Qur'an, hadith, learning du'as, learning fiqh. It's also actually learning knowledge in general, because knowledge in general is an attribute of God. So, what can we take from Tennyson? Yes, sorry viewers, we seem to have some connection problems with Facebook, so I'm not sure. This is the first time that we're doing this, so I'm not sure how well this is all going to come out, because we've been speaking for a good 10 minutes now. Alhamdulillah, whatever we've said, if there's anything good, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward us. And any nonsense, then that's from me. But anyway, I was saying that in Islam, the Prophet ﷺ said that talabul ilman faridatan ala kulli Muslim, that seeking knowledge is an obligation for every Muslim, and seeking knowledge in its widest sense. So seeking knowledge of Sharia, knowledge of Hadith, knowledge of Tasawwuf, but also just knowledge in general. And so when I'm like Tennyson, if I have to spend maybe it's a week where I have to spend time studying Charge of the Light Brigade, and then we look at writing an essay on it. So that poem, it occupies my thoughts, for days whilst I'm teaching it. So what do I take from it? Well, I think Charge of the Light Brigade, as I said to you before, he describes the valley as the valley of death and the mouth of hell. And so what I take from that is that unjust war, unnecessary war, is a source of oppression. Is a source of oppression in the world, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I have forbidden oppression for me, so do not oppress. And so those who are involved in pushing false, unnecessary, unjust wars, they're bringing oppression onto the earth. And so I guess it's a cautionary tale. It's also about bravery, like the Muslims in Badr, people who just gave their lives unflinchingly for a cause. So I guess that's the wisdom that I take from Charge of the Light Brigade in terms of...
Well, I like going back to your question, how do we link this to Sufism or Islam in general? I would say that what I've learned through history of the connections, many connections between the Islamic empires and the West, you just start to sense that, for example, like with Edward Fitzgerald, who translated the Rubaiyat. So
Of Omar Khayyam.
Of Omar Khayyam, yeah, of Omar Khayyam. Well, we don't know if it's Omar Khayyam, but that's how it was presented. It needed a person, and that's a very romantic name, isn't it? Omar Khayyam. Perfect. But of course, to some people, it may not have been perfect. But Tennyson wrote about Fitzgerald and wrote about Omar Khayyam, the noble infidel, sort of thing, the noble infidel. And people began to wonder, who is this old Fitz then? And you start to think that Tennyson isn't as black and white as you first imagine. He may have not so much romanticized, but if you're going to write a poem about something, you can be drawn into it. Okay, you could say that some of the great poetry of some of the First World War poets, are also, they're so beautiful, so powerful. Are they actually saying this is heroic? But people like Wilfred Owen, you never have any doubt about it, do you? It's anti-heroic.
Yes, anti-war, definitely.
It's anti-war, it's anti-heroic. So there are degrees, but you begin to see with if you start reading around Tennyson, that he had contacts with people like Fitzgerald, Matthew Arnold, and you start to see this broader picture that across religions. It just does. And like with Crossing the Bar, that poem, he purposely uses the image of the pilot. So it's not only a Christian image. It's something broader. And I think that's one of the things poets do.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. So just once again, another reminder, I'm Novid Shaid here, this is Paul Sutherland. We're here in Lincoln, in this historic city of Lincoln. We have the cathedral just there, and we have the statue of Tennyson just there. Alfred Lord Tennyson is a famous poet of literature, and the two of us, we've just come here to meet because we've shared various poetry projects over the last few years. We thought it's finally time to meet and just have a chat in general. And we're just sitting here in this beautiful little area just near the cathedral. We're having a chat about Tennyson. We're talking about the influence.
And a dragonfly. There's a dragonfly.
There's a dragonfly scooting about as well. And we've just talked about how Sidi Paul has been studying literature since youth, really.
17.
And mashallah, you're in your 70s now.
Yeah, correct? 76 in fact.
76, mashallah. So I'm mid-40s. I've got quite a way to go to reach Paul, but I've also been studying literature and writing since childhood as well.
Mashallah.
So we have, here's a writer in his more senior kind of age, mashallah.
With 18 published books, I guess it counts.
Doing very well, yeah. And here's me, also a writer and teacher, now kind of middle-aged.
Young
middle-aged. Yeah, indeed. So
well, the thing is, to me, what you're saying about seek knowledge into China, okay? If we just take that expression, Muhammad alayhi salam is a person with such breadth, and the danger is always to narrow him down and not see how he was such a, he was reciting letters to emperors, he was aware of what was going on in different faiths, different peoples, and like you think of Tennyson and you read some of his letters and you realize he's writing to Queen Victoria saying, I'm reading Schopenhauer.
Right.
What do you think of Schopenhauer, madam? And you just don't get.
Could you just explain Schopenhauer, just for those of us who don't know who he was,
German
and his relevance?
German idealistic poet, and not poet, sorry, philosopher. Quite challenging to the British throne. The will of power. I don't know him as well as I know Nietzsche, but I've often assumed that if Tennyson's reading Schopenhauer, he's probably reading Nietzsche as well, and he's probably coming in contact with Goethe, so he knows the German, so there's another thing. If he's reading Goethe, then he probably knows that Goethe wrote poems relating to Sufi tradition of the Divan.
It is interesting how some of these Europeans were drawn to Eastern philosophies and Eastern religions. I guess the only exposure that I've had really of the Germans is Hesse. Hermann Hesse and Siddhartha.
So I love Siddhartha.
Yeah, I've read Siddhartha when I was a student. I don't know if people who are watching this, Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha. It's almost like his interpretation of the Buddha. But as Muslims, as I said to you before, wisdom is the lost she-camel of the Muslim, and so there's a lot of wisdom in Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Worth a read.
Absolutely, and the only danger of all this, and this is what fundamentalists think, is that it undermines your faith. I see it the other way around, that you have to have a strong faith to venture into these other areas. And that's why I think regular worship, fasting, like you're doing actually, Novad, and zikr, and these things build up your faith so you feel more at peace as you get older, also as a factor to investigate areas which are slightly outside
the comfort zone.
Outside the comfort zone. And that phrase, lost she-camel, is if Muhammad ﷺ is saying, if you don't do this, if you don't know this knowledge in a broader sense, you're failing as a Muslim. And this, of course, is quite challenging. But Tennyson would have been aware, definitely, would have been aware, and that's why he highlighted old Edward Fitzgerald. He would have been aware of the Divan of Goethe. And these people often didn't make these things very publicized because it wasn't politically correct to go around saying that you had read this or had read the other, when it was still illegal up until the 1870s to be a Muslim in this country. It's like, or a Roman Catholic. But they did do an awful lot of exploring, and the Grand Tour, the Romantic poets going on the Grand Tour to Italy. How could they go to Italy without being touched by, Islam and the Ottomans and all that?
Yeah, I mean, going back to Tennyson, and forgive my ignorance that I constantly refer to Charge of the Light Brigade. That's
you said you did another one. What's the other one?
There's the Lady of Shalott.
The Lady of Shalott is fantastically
interesting. There's the Lady of Shalott as well, but I think with Tennyson, because we're here outside the statue of Tennyson in Lincoln. In Lincoln here. If you read, Lord Alfred Tennyson, if you read particularly the Charge of the Light Brigade, and we were talking about this before, is that it has this incantational kind of strong presence about it. You can't but help but to be drawn into the rhythm. And it's a great reminder that language, it has its own kind of its own magic. It can spellbind you. Just the choice of words and then the rhythm that the words present, you get lost in the rhythm. And obviously we read the Qur'an, and the Qur'an it's a miracle of rhythm. When you read the Qur'an, so for example, Surah Ikhlas is one of the shortest surahs of the Qur'an. But it's also known as a third. If you read Surah Ikhlas, then it's like reading a third of the Qur'an. And it's very simple, but it's so rhythmical. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. And so if you analyze, obviously I'm no expert in Quranic exegesis, but just as poets and people who are interested in writing, you can't but help, when you're reading the Qur'an, you notice the rhythm, you notice the rhyming, and it draws you in. But I think the difference with English poetry, I think with poetry from other languages and about the dunya, I guess they give me some kind of, they draw you towards like universal wisdom within the world. But the Qur'an, actually, when you read the Qur'an, I feel like it takes you into almost like a state, a different state of being. When you read the Qur'an, there's something about the sounds. There's something about the we talk about the arrangement. This is the divine rhetoric.
Some of the surahs begin with just a sound. I don't think just as a pejorative,
like the Alif Lam Mim.
I love that.
And
I love that, because even though I don't know Arabic, and this is I'm not the only one, I'm sure, who doesn't know Arabic very well. I can say that and feel I'm making a contact with this wisdom, and this wisdom is so great that it can't be contained by words. And my next book is called Only Words, because Jalaluddin Rumi, the 13th century Persian poet, ended some of his poems saying, "These are only words."
SubhanAllah.
These are only words. And I think that's essential in understanding poetry, that these are only words. There's something. The poet is trying to take you somewhere else, and maybe it is through the rhythm and rhyming, as you say, which are something like an extension of the intellect. So this is the charge of the Light Brigade, but this is a poem. And the title is not the whole poem.
Right.
It's an indicator. It's not the whole poem. And what you're saying is, to me, there's something almost magical or esoteric in the very fact that there are these rhythms, and you really feel that in Lady of Shalott. And again, we did talk about earlier his very positive attitude towards women, and there you see in Lady of Shalott, when she leaves her space, like she could be confined as a Victorian woman with her mirror, and her knitting and everything. When she leaves that place, she dies, but it's conceived as a tragedy. It's not conceived as a punishment. It's conceived as a tragedy of her confinement, that this should happen to her.
Well, I haven't taught the poem in a long time, but I have an image of the Lady of Shalott in the boat on the river.
Things about it,
various legends about that. Now, just to, Paul, just to kind of we'll draw this to a close, because I don't want to waste your time any longer. Well, inshallah, this is not a waste of time. This is, inshallah, good conversation amongst friends. In terms of your own poetry, what do you hope your poetry will produce in the world? Now, for me, I'll begin with me, and then you can answer that question.
All right, okay.
For me, some of my favorite poets are actually the Sufi poets who write in Arabic, and there are two fairly recent poets and Sufis. One was called Sheikh Ahmed al-Alawi and Mustaghanimi. He was the great Algerian saint of the 20th century. I don't know if you've read the book, The Sufi Saint of the 20th Century, by Martin Links. Well, the saint is called Sheikh Ahmed al-Alawi, who's Algerian, and one of his contemporaries was called Sheikh Muhammad ibn al-Habib. Muhammad ibn al-Habib. Both of them wrote a diwan in the Arabic language, in which they, these poems were written in a state of you could say intoxication, or you could say in a trance, or you could say in a
Ecstasy.
very, very strong kind
Ecstasy.
of presence,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And their themes are obviously the intoxication of being close to Allah and being close to the Prophet ﷺ. But the thing is about their poetry is read across the world, and it's read devotionally. It's read in dhikr gatherings, and people they're actually texts which lead people to this presence that they talk about. Obviously, with there's the Qur'an and the Sunnah, but these texts are also used as guides to taste the same presences that they felt, as long as you follow the same path. So I just hope, with my own poetry, in a materialistic way, you dream of, your works making a lot of money, but for me, if there's one piece of work that I do, one poem or one short story or just one paragraph of what I've written, if it can just give people just a little bit of a taste of the divine presence, or just a tiny taste of the Prophet, love for the Prophet ﷺ, then inshallah the job is done. And we just continue with the day job. I'm a teacher, I have to teach in the classroom.
Yeah.
But if I can just write a couplet,
Well, that's
and
the
that
distinction
transports
you're
someone.
making. That's the distinction
So
you're
that's my answer.
making
What's your
between that's the distinction you're making between this idea of general knowledge and this dedication or devotion to try to communicate something of what we feel on a deeper level that you're not necessarily going to get out of Tennyson or out of anyone else, but these poets you're talking about. Well, I have two things I would say. It's not an accident that my most popular book is Poems on the Life of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu. And it's not an accident that most of my work is through people who are Muslims. It's not an accident. It's how the divine wants it to be. But on the other hand, one has to appreciate, and it was really true of Jalaluddin Rumi as well, you're not always in that state. You're not always in that state in which you can write poems the life of the Prophet Muhammad. In fact, I know no way back to write like I did in that book. It's something given as a gift, and it has a limited period of time. And Rumi didn't start writing until he was quite on in his life. When we did start writing, he wrote an awful lot. Yes, he recited, he dictated an awful lot. And he would have gone on dictating as long as he lived. But it doesn't follow all the time that it works that way. So I see it as, on the one hand, gathering the sort of knowledge, as my sheikh would say, Allah bless his soul, Sheikh Nazim Al-Akani, this is rocket fuel, rocket fuel. You read Tennyson, you read this stuff, it's rocket fuel, but you have rocket fuel for a purpose, to try to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to enter that divine sphere, which gives your life such meaning, and through zikr and through that's why these people like Rumi, Hafiz are so interesting, because they also have these spiritual experiences. Like Hafiz is in love, desperately in love with a woman, and so he goes in this cave for so many days, and when Jibreel comes to him and says, well, do you want the woman or do you want what I've shown you? So he chooses what is shown him and becomes a poet. It's connected. It's connected. These kind of experiences, and my experiences, small though they are in comparison to these giants, you still have them. What are you going to do with them? It's like my poem, the Teller. You've given me this. I'm going to try to talk about it. I'm going to try to express how I feel about this. this man, Muhammad alayhi salam,
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
even though I don't have this knowledge, I don't have that knowledge, I don't have this, but you've given this to me. You don't want me to just hide my talent under a stone, do you? No, you don't. In that parable, you, even if you're just given one talent, you try to use that. You don't say, like in the parable in the Bible, see, I know the Bible probably better than I know the Quran, because I was brought up as a Christian and I was a Christian before. And I don't like distinctions in religions very much, because I believe we're coming from the same source. There must be a way back that's one, that says somewhere that as many breaths that have been expelled since the origins of time are ways to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that doesn't leave out many people, does it? And this expansive universal kind of view is what I strive for, and I want my poetry to somehow give that to people, give them the freedom, and also in a way help them be more compassionate. That is certainly an underlying thing with me, is to try to encourage people to be compassionate towards each other.
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the Qur'an, every chapter begins with the sacred ayah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, most compassionate, the most merciful. And even, in our belief about the finality of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his message, he's Khatam al-Nabiyyin, he's the prophet who his, the Qur'an is the last testament to human beings. And even though we have this, we believe that the previous books have been kind of tampered with or changed over time, with the teaching of the Trinity and what have you. Ultimate judgment belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Absolutely. He says, I will say in which way you guys differ from each other. Not you. We will say how you differ from each other. I Shaykh, Allah bless his soul, Shaykh Nazim said, the Jibal, the Gospel, the Quran, the Torah are holy books. And sometimes you're just absolutely amazed how the idea of the Trinity evolves out of the Gospel. When Jesus gives, when Peter asks Jesus, so how do we pray? He never mentions his name. He says, they pray to me. He says, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name.
MashaAllah.
So how does this happen? Well, like Muhammad alayhi salam says when he's asked, which is the best time for Muslims? He says, now is the best time for Muslims. Because I'm here.
MashaAllah.
And he knows that it just can't be held on to. Whatever it is, this sense of presence is so greater, the sensitivity of Muhammad alayhi salam, that he could choose whom to forgive and whom not to forgive. That kind of thing is incredibly difficult to sustain.
So, Sidi Paul, just
sorry.
to finish this,
I'm chatting on like a madman.
just to finish this off now.
We're with a man, so we should be chatting like one.
To finish off our little conversation here in Lincoln with Alfred Tennyson, we'll just finish off with I'll choose one book that I will challenge people to find and perhaps purchase it and gain something, and you choose one book from your collection.
From my collection.
From your collection.
All right.
So I always advertise my novel, The Hidden Ones.
Yeah, it's very good. It's very good.
It's my novel.
Yeah.
And it's it's a thriller. There's mysticism. There's supernatural. There are 3 characters who have to face evil, and they use their spiritual powers to combat and to overcome this evil. And
one person recognizes another person cross-culturally and cross-religions, that they're carrying something spiritually special.
So that's my book. It's available on Amazon. So it's there. Please get it. And my website is novid.co.uk, novid.co.uk. And now Sidi Paul will give us one from him.
Oh, well, I'd like to give you the one that's going to be published, inshallah, in the autumn, called Only Words. And it's going to contain my books, the 7 Earth Odes, and the Holy Week sequence, that unfortunately very few copies of that remain, so that's going to be republished. I'm very happy about that. And the miniatures, Ben Nicholson miniatures from the new and selected poems, and poems on the life of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam. Those 4 books will be in this book. It's not a vast, all these are very small books, and then another 50 pages of new poems that are loosely called mystical. This is being published by Vellum Press, Vellum Press, or publishing in Manchester, and they have a website, and you can look them up, and they'll come online in due course. The launch of the book is November the 15th at Blackwell University Bookshop in Manchester.
MashaAllah. Excellent. So you heard it there. Alhamdulillah. So that's me, Novid Shaid, and Sidi Paul Sutherland. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.